Welcome to the live panel session on role of EdTech for future-proofing education. We are very happy to gather a panel of stellar speakers today for today's session. Before I pass my time to the moderator, if you have any questions for the panel, we will have a live Q&A at the end of 15 minutes of the session. So feel free to put your questions in the live discussion question tab, which is on Swapcard. Without further ado, I would like to pass my time to Stephen, who is our moderator for today. So over to you, Stephen.
G'day. Hello, lovely people. So basically for today, our topic is future-proofing education with EdTech. We're trying to take a little bit of sort of a big picture policy idea, but also the reality of schools. So 4 of us are teachers and we have a teacher trainer as well. So before I get too caught up in my own words, I'm just going to throw over to Richard. If you could introduce yourself for us. Obviously, we've read all the full details on the website and such, but if you could.
Sure. Thanks, Stephen. Thanks, everyone, and my fellow panelists today as well. Really excited to be here. My name is Richard Siddhartha. I come from Jakarta, Indonesia. I'm a board member for a chain of preschools and a K-12 international school based here in Jakarta called Kiddie Planet and Beacon Academy. I'm also the chairperson for the Association of National and Private Schools, Indonesia's leading educational and professional development organization, and we focus on providing affordable and accessible training for teachers and leaders. I'm a regular tech consumer, an advocate for social and emotional learning in schools, and a proud husband and dad. And happy Father's Day, everyone.
Beautiful, likewise. Michael, you want to give us your intro?
Yes, kia ora and selamat datang. I'm Michael Harvey, and I'm a New Zealand educator, but presently teaching internationally at Melbourne College in Malaysia. I'm a digital leader at Melbourne College, trying to implement digital pedagogy in the classroom. And also for my sins, I teach IB and IGCSE physics and IB chemistry and IGCSE physics and chemistry. And my big interest, what I'm interested in discussing further in this conversation, is the role of artificial intelligence in the future of education.
Beautiful, and we'll try to get to that. I think we will. Jiang, do you want to intro yourself for us?
Hi, everyone. My name is Jiang Xueqian. I am based in Chengdu, China, home of the pandas. That's what we're famous for. I am a Canadian citizen, and I am in China consulting to public schools, primarily kindergartens and primary schools. And my role is to help Chinese teachers develop a more progressive pedagogy, implement more 21st century teaching practices. So I'm very happy to be here and to share my experience and thoughts with everyone. Thank you.
Beautiful. I should probably introduce myself. I should have started with that probably. My name's Stephen Colber. I'm basically keep myself busy talking about the future of EdTech, the future world of work, mostly through sort of union channels, so policy level discussions and lots of academics. So as of last night, I was talking to an academic about the possibility of using natural language processing to create essays on behalf of the academic without actually having to write any herself, and so we were getting excited about that sort of stuff. But so for that reason, if you have questions, put them in the chat and they'll come through to me here, which will keep it a little bit more grounded in reality. Otherwise, if it's up to me, I might end up talking off the planet. So our first question is basically internet's increasingly being viewed as kind of a basic human right, actually, in which we should talk about Francis Toscano is currently struggling with his internet at his end, and so he will join us if he can, but perhaps he may not be able to. So just to forefront that for us. But I'll throw to Richard first. What is the sort of access to the internet and EdTech in Indonesia or where you are?
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. We basically have 2 different sectors here in Indonesia, as in most countries, the public sector and the private sector. While the private sector in general tends to be better off, but even within the private sector, we have very different kinds of schools. And there is great disparity in what a child may have access to at home. So you may have a private sector school, a private school that's a relatively small school, and you may have a private school that's actually extremely rich in resources and have large campuses and what have you. So that disparity still exists. And one can safely say that even one-to-one access for students is reserved for the top schools, even in the private sector. Schools that are lower, I use that word loosely, but lower in the spectrum will have issues with access. Shared devices among siblings, especially during this online learning. We've heard a lot of parents struggle with shared devices because overnight they obviously weren't ready to make sure that each child had a device, especially when the children are in primary school or in early childhood for that matter. And those requirements became important. Or even borrowing a parent's device. And that causes some frustration as well. Public sector schools, especially when speaking of schools in remote areas, may have mostly had access to online learning through smartphones, or what we may call smartphones. On the brighter side, smartphones have definitely made it easier and more equitable for most of the country to access information. However, there are still many that don't have access. And for this, what the government actually ended up doing, and this is weeks after, is to rope in the National State Broadcasting Service to actually start putting lessons for primary school, middle school, senior school, and stuff like that on television to try and sort of make it easier for those families. So it's a really big country. It's very diverse. And in that, there is its beauty and, of course, her challenges as well.
Beautiful. Maybe, Michael, if I could throw to you, how about where you are in Malaysia? Obviously, you're in a relatively well-off school.
Yes, I think just to reinforce what Richard said in his beginning conversation there is a big disparity. So actually, even within my school, which is well-to-do, there's also differences in equity about access for the students off-site. So on-site, we have very good Wi-Fi facilities and devices and access to devices. But again, once they go off-site, there is disparity in terms of being able to access clear Wi-Fi in different countries. Because we're an international school, we've got students in Papua New Guinea, we have students in mainland China, we have students in Boston. So again, there's also the issue of time differences associated with that as well. And that's just in the private schools who tend to be well funded, but then you've also got to consider the state schools, which have issues around equity to Wi-Fi, and even issues of equity in terms of devices. So just like Indonesia, Malaysia is a very broad country, with a range of access to devices, and this variety does make it a very interesting and an amazing place to live in, but it also creates its own challenges.
Right. Maybe I'm calling you Jiang, but obviously that's not exactly your name. Huixing, do you want to speak to the situation in China, maybe referring to the tiers as well? Because a big discussion of yours and mine was about equity in the tiers and how technology might be able to sort of solve that issue.
Sure. So EdTech in China is really exciting. China has the largest private EdTech market in the world, surpassing that of both the United States and India. So there are 14 EdTech unicorns in the world. Unicorns are considered startups that are valued at over $1 billion, right? There are 14, and China has 8 of them. And because of COVID-19, obviously the EdTech market is accelerating in China. But even in the public sector, there's a lot of excitement going on. The government has really invested heavily in EdTech in what is called the Future Schools Project. So you go to an average urban school in China, and what you'll find is teachers using smartboards to teach. You'll find classrooms equipped with video cameras to record and live stream classes for training purposes. You'll also find teachers using mobile phone apps to collaborate and design lesson plans together. China believes heavily that AI is the future. And so we have a lot of experimentation in AI in schools. There's a school in Hangzhou that's using facial recognition technology in order to try to improve students' concentration levels in order to improve their test performance. Another school is using brain scans. Many schools in China are using facial recognition technology in order to track attendance. And they're collecting a lot of big data in order to store to the cloud. So I think that when it comes to EdTech, both the Chinese government is very ambitious and also very forward-looking. At the same time, it believes that EdTech is a very powerful tool to address education inequities in China. So like Malaysia, like Indonesia, there's tremendous inequity, tremendous disparity in China, primarily between the urban areas and the rural areas, right? So, and the issue is in teacher access and teacher quality. So most teachers refuse to go to rural areas because they feel that it's a hardship pose, and there are really not that many educational opportunities for them in rural areas. So the government has invested heavily in broadband access. So over 90% of rural schools have access to high quality broadband access. And what that has enabled is for urban teachers to live stream their teaching into rural classrooms. And so there's been a lot of forward thinking and investment in EdTech in China. It's a very exciting time to be here in China.
Yeah, for sure. Amazing. We're still working on Francis joining us or not, and there's a question that's come through from, I'm guessing it's pronounced Pani, which we'll get to just in a moment because I don't want to jump too wholeheartedly into AI straight away. So I'll go straight back to you, Richard, just to keep it on brand. So in your experience of the last 3 months, let's say, or the COVID period, or even pre, what's been your kind of the best example of EdTech that you've seen around your setting?
Sure. The main takeaway for me after what is now 2 months of online teaching and learning has been keeping it simple. A lot of schools, or at least I can speak from our own experience, using one platform to manage teaching and learning and a couple of tools to basically support it. This makes it easier for everybody involved, including the teachers as well, students, teachers, and parents. While I'm sure that there are much more spectacular examples of educational technology uses during this time, what I've seen is the application of the heart of the education process through the Keep It Simple philosophy. Most schools here have access to G Suite tools, Classroom, Drive, Meet, Hangouts, Chat, and what have you. Microsoft Teams is what we're using now in Zoom. And some have found workflows around this. So teachers have also explored several apps to complement the learning experience, including Seesaw for online portfolios or Flipgrids, literacy and numeracy-based apps to complement the learning experience. What I've seen most success is where the relationship between the teacher and student is maintained. Students don't learn if they aren't engaged. They don't learn if they can't relate to the teacher. So I'm particularly more interested of how this continues on once the new school year starts, because that's actually going to be happening next month. And when teachers need to connect with new students, need to connect with new teachers as well. So ensuring that students are checking in, using Google Sheets or even using Flipgrid, being able to talk and share about their emotions and their feelings. How are they feeling that day? Continues that feeling of a community and that we're actually not isolated. In addition, using tools such as Padlet, where students are collaborating on ideas together and being able to view and comment on each other's opinions has really helped the online learning experience feel more connected. So really simple stuff, nothing over and above, but whatever the tools are in front of you, where I've seen the best outcome is where the teachers and students are continuing to use that relationship, continuing to connect using technology.
Yeah, for sure. I guess it'd probably be a different question if all of our systems went into remote learning from day one. That probably would be a much different sort of situation. Michael, how about where you are in terms of connection, engagement, keeping personalities involved? How have you seen it going?
Yeah, I think I have to agree with Richard to keep it simple, to just have 2 or 3 apps that the students are comfortable with and the teachers are comfortable with, and the importance of these connections that you've already developed before the pandemic actually occurred. I think it's also important that we focus on the idea that online learning is actually a completely different pedagogy to learning in class. So the model that I've implemented at Marlborough is the 5E model with Caitlin Tucker, if anyone's familiar with that. So it's basically the engagement part, which is your synchronous, you're connecting on the Google Meet or the Microsoft Team or the Zoom. And then you've also got the exploration part, so you're exploring the information together as a group. So that's your connectiveness and your co-collaboration, bit of Vygotsky there. And then the students have to explain. and that's the usefulness of applications like Flipgrid, because it gives the students other mechanisms to explain not just the written text, and you can actually get a deeper understanding, because I've got a large number of ESL students, especially from Korea and mainland China, and they struggle obviously with the language at first instance. So using applications like Flipgrid gives them another means to communicate beyond just being able to write. And it's been quite an effective tool for a number of my EAL learners. And then there's the further elaboration of concepts after you've explained them. So that's, again, the kind of differentiation which online learning can allow, because it gives the students also time. We've basically rolled back the content in the sense of what we're actually giving them to actually absorb, because it's a stressful time being stuck at home with parents, especially if you're a teenager. And then you've got the evaluation process as well. So your evaluation of what their learning has come from and how they can move forward and develop their own kind of learning pathway. So I think it's important that we don't make technology the be-all end-all, that at the end of the day, it's the pedagogy and the lesson design which has to be rigorous before we start implementing the educational technology.
Yeah, for sure. The tool is a tool, I guess. Huixin, do you want to jump in and tell us, so maybe talk us through the tier system of schooling in China first, and then tell us the sort of the positive experiences that you've seen over there.
Right. So I'm not sure what you mean by a tier system. There are cities that are tiered. First tier cities are Beijing, Shanghai, and Shenzhen and Guangzhou. They're sort of the wealthiest cities in China. Second tier cities is Chengdu, where I am, Hangzhou, I mean, many other cities. But schools are not tiered. But what is differentiated is the urban schools and the rural schools. Urban schools, obviously because schools have local fundings, urban schools would have much more access to EdTech and teacher training than the rural schools. But here, EdTech has played a very powerful role. Urban schools are tasked with teacher training of rural schools, and that has been very effective thanks to EdTech. And so China uses a three-step process. It's very simple, but it's very effective. The first step is that urban teachers will share their lesson plans with rural school teachers. And these lesson plans are actually scripts, right? So for 45 minutes, every minute, the script will tell you what to say and what to do in the classroom. Second step is that the urban teachers will live stream their classroom teaching to rural teachers so that rural teachers can follow along, take notes, and try to emulate the teaching. And the third step is that the rural teachers will, using the script, will teach the class themselves, and the urban teachers will, via live stream, watch the teaching and over instant messaging provide feedback and guidance. And so in China, because of the dominance of WeChat, right, communication, sharing lesson plans, live streaming, and instant messaging can all be done via WeChat, which allows for pretty seamless communication. But but having said EdTech and seeing its advantage, I would say that EdTech is useful when three conditions are met, right? So the first condition is that what's being taught is a very specific skill or technique. Second is that the students themselves have to be extremely motivated, and they have to know what they're learning and why they're learning it. And the third condition, which is the most important condition, is a teacher has to be highly capable and effective, especially at communication. And so what these three conditions also tell me is that the online world of EdTech is very different from the offline world. And both Michael and Richard have explained this. But I would say that EdTech is not good at teaching three things. First of all, it's not good at teaching motivation, getting students to be engaged and motivated and curious, right? It's not good at teaching soft skills like collaboration and emotional learning and social emotional learning, right? And the third thing that it's not good at doing is teaching meta-learning strategies. For example, self-assessment and deep reflection. And so that gives us a idea of what a blended learning model would look like, right? So on the offline world, we focus more on soft skills and student engagement and motivation. In the online world, we focus more on technique, skills, and knowledge. So yeah.
Okay, yeah, that sounds, Michael, I saw your eyebrows shoot up. Scripted lessons and sort of, it sounds like good. And there's a question here from Mark Parry about sort of professional development. Do you want to speak to either professional development, scripted lessons, streaming video lessons, or anything like that, Michael?
Yes, I've actually worked in both kind of systems of scripted lessons. I guess for me, I'd see it as a bit of an anathema. I like to be able to teach to my particular style. And I think that personalizes it for the learners as well. They can see you're a human and that you have this particular style of teaching, which they can adapt to. Because one of the important lessons that students have to learn is being able to interact with different people and different modes of teaching. So yeah, I'm on two minds about the idea of scripted lessons.
Okay. Richard, I might throw this one to you. So the question, like I said, from Mark Parry, I know you do sort of like, what do you call it? Not road trips, but sort of regional professional development. I'm sure you can put better words around it than me. But how do you approach professional development in the sort of outside of your schoolwork that you do with PD and professional learning? Welcome, Francis. Go ahead, Richard.
Yes. Sorry. So the question is professional development just in general?
Yeah. Well, how do you do it when you take your sort of EdTech STEAM kind of on tour? How do you do that?
Yeah. So basically, with us and PD, EdTech is, as I said, in Indonesia, it's not as ubiquitous. So what we've done recently is we've just started our first tech conference last year. And what we do is we mostly look at leading Apple distinguished educators or Google certified teachers, and we sort of bring them on to come and speak and to inspire teachers about the possibilities. Quite a lot of the time, schools aren't necessarily even aware of what is available for free, something that you can actually use for free. So it's just about getting it back to that basic level, and also used as a celebration to get teachers from local schools and see what they've done in their own little elements within their own confines on STEAM and building apps with local students, even at local schools. So initially, when I actually spoke about how diverse it is, it does not mean that within the local school system or the public school system, there aren't these gems that are taking place purely because there are some champions in there that are really interested. And within with the limited tools that are available to them and a lot of free tools available online, that they aren't actually sort of doing great things. So the idea of PD, where we're concerned as far as our organization, is more about spreading really great stories and what is actually possible within our limitations.
Beautiful. Francis, I'm going to try and welcome you into the call. We've got lots of people joining us from the Philippines, so you're probably known to them already, but do you want to introduce yourself to the audience for us?
Right. Hi, everyone. So I hope my audio is clear. So yeah, hi to everyone in the panel. Hi, Steven. Hi to everyone who's participating, especially those coming from the Philippines. I'm Francis Jim Toscano. So I am an EdTech coordinator in a school in the Philippines. I'm also a digital learning specialist. And I continue helping other schools, especially in the K-12 sector, and the adoption of technology integration. But just a disclaimer, I'm not an expert in the know-how of the technical aspect of EdTech. My line really is on school leadership, administration, and instructional aspect of EdTech. So I will not know how to fix your gadget or your internet connection, but I can help you transform your education with technology. Yeah.
That's a very funny way of putting it. I like it. You could put that on your resume, I reckon. It's first line, I cannot fix your internet, but all right. We're going to throw to this very difficult question that's come through from Pani, which is, so it's a question about personalization and artificial intelligence and whether artificial intelligence kind of holds a role in that. So I might ask Huixin Jiang to join us and tell us his views on AI and personalization, and then I'll ask Michael, and then maybe Francis and Richard can talk about personalization maybe without AI, and then we'll sort of see where we're at after that. So Jiang, if you will.
Yeah, so if you look at AI and you look at the industries that has most impacted, the industries have basically three main characteristics, right? The first characteristic is that its output, its goal is very precise, very concrete, very limited. So for example, Amazon only cares about you buying more things from Amazon. It doesn't care about anything else, right? Second characteristic is that the parameters are very limited. So think about chess, and it's very limited parameters, so we can build an AI system to beat any human being at chess. But we can't build an AI system to beat a 6-year-old at a game of tag, right? And the third characteristic is the ease of big data collection. So the biggest AI companies in the world are Amazon, Facebook, and Google, because they're internet companies which allow for seamless collection of big data. So if you look at all school systems in the world, right now China is the most AI friendly, meaning that the Chinese school system is the most ready to adapt AI into its system for 3 reasons. First is that, one, the goal is very simple. Chinese care about test scores and only care about test scores. So your AI system will be designed in order to increase test scores. Second is the limit of parameters, right? So China has a centralized, homogeneous education bureaucracy. So from grades 1 until university, a Chinese teacher will lecture to a class of 50 students, and that's consistent throughout China. And the third is the ease of big data collection. China doesn't really have a concept of privacy, so you're able to have facial recognition technology in the classroom. You're able to collect all data about a student, including socioeconomic background, disciplinary history, preferences. So really, China is the most AI friendly. The big challenge in China is to figure out what AI will do. And I think here you have 2 choices. The first choice is to just improve test scores. So what will happen is the AI system will develop customized tests for students. And in the short term, this will dramatically increase test scores. But in the long term, it may create severe psychological issues for the students. So think about this. Think about if your kid from age 6 until age 18, all he or she did was play video games for 8 hours a day. And that's what it would look like if China were to adopt an AI system to improve test scores. Where I think AI could be really exciting is if China were to use AI in order to improve teacher training. And so the idea here is that every classroom in China, you would have sensors to track what happens in the classroom and collect millions of data points, including lighting, temperature, seating arrangement, eye contact, teacher tone of voice, laughter, basically millions of data sets. And then the AI system would try to correlate that with student motivation and academic achievement. And the power of this is, if you think about it, this would be basically the automation of the scientific process, and teachers would become data scientists themselves. And then teachers could start engaging in experiments that would have meaning and impact. For example, maybe a group of teachers around the world come together and say, we think that laughter would improve student motivation. And right now, if teachers were to say that, I think they would be laughed at themselves. But with an AI system in place, they could actually try this. And the AI system could then really quickly figure out if laughter does improve student motivation. And this would help with the scaling and acceleration of positive change. Yeah, that's
Sorry. My fault. Well, Michael, as always, I think you're making a good counterpoint for us here. A question especially has come through about ethics and AI, and I know in Australia, like, we have very specific laws about biometric data, which is sort of the things that we were just talking about. But how do you see AI and the ethics and all that playing out in schools?
I guess before I even discuss AI, I quite like the last point made about teaching as an inquiry. So I do that already without actually using artificial intelligence. I use student test scores and other particular metrics to see if a particular approach is working for my class. So I haven't tried the laughter thing. I do a lot of dad jokes, so I think it might be a similar kind of approach. But I already do that, but I think it could be a possible useful application of artificial intelligence in that sense. Having now actually worked in China for 2 years, previously before taking this role, it was quite clear that a big driver in Chinese education was to pass examinations. And the social emotional learning aspects of Chinese education weren't really there. So I think in terms of AI, that that method does work in that sense. But the problem I have, I guess, with artificial intelligence is it has a large possibility for a large range of impacts, but they're still being deployed in very limited ways, and that also just includes in China at the moment as well. And as mentioned, AI success or progress has only really come into one type. You input some data, say A, and you quickly generate a simple response, B. But there, of course, there are limitations with that. We've seen now with Facebook and the artificial intelligent algorithms that there are problems with basically becoming bubbles of information. Some, for instance, in the States, going into a bathroom, a white person uses the artificial intelligence generating dryer. I can use it. Person behind me who has a darker skin complexion can't use it because the machine learning only used a particular race to actually generate the information for that detector. So one important aspect, because artificial intelligence is still designed by humans, the algorithms are still designed by humans, the data going in gets the data that you want. So if you want increased examination results, then I guess the data going in gets certain particular outcomes. I guess that would be, so the idea that the Terminator is going to come in and destroy mankind, I think is ridiculous. I think that's just hyperbole. But if we're measuring the wrong things, then the outcomes we get will be wrong. So for example, my school well-being is a big thing, but how do you quantify how to improve well-being with artificial intelligence? It's a bit of a challenge. You can then also you rediscover exciting wrong ways to teach using artificial intelligence, because again, if you use the wrong metrics to begin with, then your conclusions can also end up being wrong, and you can end up teaching using incorrect methods. And I guess it's the kind of prioritizing adaptivity over quality. So the idea of personalized learning, where you're basically adapting a particular student's learning, but then that could actually limit their understanding of a topic, because you're just personalizing it for them. Say, for example, they learn all about dinosaurs through the medium of dinosaurs because AI has personalized it that way. And then they don't learn about the majesticness of, say, blue whales. That's just a crazy idea, because you're just personalizing it, and there's no interaction with other people and other ideas. So yeah, the main issue I have, I guess, with artificial intelligence is the problem associated with what data to choose. So I'll just use the quote from Kate Crawford, who's the principal researcher at Microsoft Research. Data will always be the mark of the history of that data. That is a human history. Okay, it's just not ones and zeros, and it's held in some data sets. We're going to try and use that to train a particular system, to develop an algorithm, to do some machine learning, and to make recommendations on what to do with that particular student or group of students, or to make autonomous decisions. We need to be deeply aware of how that history has worked. That's much bigger than a purely technical question. So at the end of the day, AI, even though we're trying to make it out that it's all computers doing it in the background, is still a human endeavor, because humans are developing the algorithms and humans are deciding what data to put in the algorithm for that machine to learn.
Beautiful. Yeah, I think because I'm conscious Francis has just joined us. Francis, do you want to talk to the idea of personalization and using technology, perhaps not artificial intelligence, but kind of using students' backgrounds or histories or culture to sort of bring something a little bit more than the sort of drill and kill at the front of the class? How do you approach that?
Sure. I think what I've learned really, especially right now, is even our school, one of our philosophies actually to look at the context of our students. When we look at personalized learning, it's not really simply a matter of getting tools and then trying to make them adapt with whatever situation that the students are. We always look at their context, because in the Philippines right now, it's a mix. It's a mix of background, socioeconomic background, access to learning devices. So you get to see the different levels of the idea of context learning. So we always look at context informing how we design learning, whether with technology or without technology by the context or of the context of the students. And then when we design learning, we want it to adapt to the context. So it's context informed, it's context adaptive. When we use technology, we don't have AI much here in the Philippines, but you have technology tools that have the basic analytics behind them. Like for example, how fast the students have answered, how much of the items are correct, things like that. We take advantage of those things to inform the way we will design the lessons. So we use analytics to personalize learning. So that's before going to the lesson, before designing, we already get those data from whatever tech tools that are there. And then during the lesson, we take advantage of technology tools to inform us whether we need to adjust or try to have another approach, so that we get to adjust to the ability or to what's happening with the student. And then even after, we look at data again, like whatever technology tool data that we have from our students to evaluate the whole thing. So when we look at personalized learning, data is one based from analytics to inform how we design our learning experiences. Second one, I think, is personalization as a matter of, giving the students a choice, the learning pathway. So I think this is more obvious for us in the Philippines because, we want to tap on different technology tools to allow the students to create, for example, learning playlists containing the best curated materials, and they are given the freedom to choose which among these curated materials can they undergo or use for them to better understand the lesson at hand or the unit at hand. And then, of course, even after the lesson, in terms of demonstration of mastery of knowledge and skills of learning, we even allow them to choose whatever technology tool could best help them demonstrate their learning. Given, of course, that the assessment is not, is not, how do you call that? Given that the assessment allows for the use of different media. For example, if the assessment is about a narrative essay, sure, they need to write an essay. But if the assessment or the project is not really, stuck on one medium, then we always give the students the ability to choose. So for me, it's simply going beyond data, because as of right now in the Philippines, we don't have like AI or the advanced things. Or even if we have them, it will cost really, really much. And funding is a big challenge here in the Philippines. But we love to use technology tools to allow the students to amplify. So we always see that technology tools amplify student learning, giving them the idea of choice, voice. And then at the end, we hope that personalized learning would lead them to own up much of their learning, much of the learning process that they have undergone. Yeah.
Beautiful. So sort of data to inform teacher ideas and then choices at the other end for students. Richard, I wonder, you've spoken just in this conversation about champions for EdTech, and I know you work with a lot of those yourself. Have you seen, because we've had a question come through about tools that we would propose, have you seen any tools being used really well for personalization where you are?
Not so much in terms of speaking about personalization first. I kind of agree with what Jim says. Indonesia is very similar to the Philippines in a sense. And I do want to say that even if you've got the data to inform you and you're sort of personalizing learning, or students are interested in something and they've taken the initiative to actually go in a particular direction, there is a tendency that if, I think one of us mentioned that they're learning so much about dinosaurs, and what about the whales? Are they actually going to be exposed to that or not? Or how much? Or what is the threshold? How long are they going to go in that particular direction? And teachers, of course, need to be liberated as well in this particular process. And you're looking at teachers. You're looking at the layers that teachers have above them. And what is it that the teachers need to do? We spoke about scripted lesson plans and stuff like that before. I still know that there are a lot of schools that need to submit minute by minute or lesson by lesson plans to principals, and those lesson plans are then also part of their evaluation process, including of the test scores and all of that kind of stuff. So I really don't think that the whole process can change until the system in itself allows for that to change. So in Indonesia, what schools have done is within those parameters, they have been allowed to sort of create projects and stuff like that on their own. And that's what a lot of schools do. So you have independent research projects or collaborative projects, and slotting that into their timetables, where students are able to access all of the information that they've got from their other lessons, but they actually have a freedom to be able to develop their own project, and within that project maybe use technology, or what some schools do is they actually say, right, your project must focus on one of the United Nations Sustainable Goals, and you have to actually use a piece of technology as well. And within that presentation, they have to be able to show how they've been able to use all of these factors and sort of put them together. So I feel within, again, our own limited ways, allowing students to be able to explore. They love technology. So even if they're doing a song, if they're using GarageBand, if they're using exciting software, if they're using some of the free software that's available online, and they've developed a mock-up of an app, for example, anything that allows them to sort of communicate their message about something that they're passionate about. So personalized learning happens, but it also happens within, I guess, a compartmentalized, liberated space within the school, other than all the other things that we actually need to satisfy as part of the education system requirements.
Can you explain that? So personalization, it's kind of like you've got your curriculum, let's say, and then personalization happens between the teacher and the students almost?
So I guess what Jim was saying earlier is, of course, personalization can happen when we use apps to actually show us how kids have done literacy, how kids have done in numeracy, how fast they were able to access certain questions and things like that. And in those particular sections, we know which student needs help and differentiate instruction based on that. But if you're fully looking at, I'm really interested in a particular topic and I really want to explore that topic, well, you're not going to get a lot of time in literacy to be able to do that, or in numeracy to be able to do that. There needs to be a section within the timetable that schools need to say, this is their creative space. This is their independent research project, where they get 2 hours a week, they get a mentor, and they get to work on all of these skills and bring their passion into play. And then what schools then do is say, right, you need to use a technology, a piece of technology, to be able to communicate this idea, or to be able to enhance this idea and communicate it with everybody.
Beautiful. I might throw that to the obvious direction of China afterwards. So you've kind of, Richard just spoke to sort of the idea of creativity and time for students to, I guess, experiment and play around with things. How does that sort of run against the exam system, Jiang, in China? Is that a movement that's happening in where you are, or that you're seeing among your teacher trainees, or is that still developing?
Yeah, so the issue in China is that parents right now are voting with their feet, which is to say that if you're not happy with the way things are in the Chinese school system, then you send your kid to a private school, which does offer a more progressive education model along the lines of what Richard and Michael and Jim have mentioned in their contexts. Or you actually go immigrate abroad, right? So because parents are voting with their feet, that just means that practices in public schools are actually more entrenched, so that students nowadays have actually less free time than 10 years ago. I mean, it's really horrible what's happening to students. And we're seeing kids burned out as early as primary school. Now, what I think, working in China and trying to promote progressive change, I think about solutions. I do think that AI is a possible solution, because right now my challenge is a challenge that everyone faces. How do we convince parents and teachers that social emotional learning, personalized learning, giving kids more autonomy and more space and more freedom will actually enhance their motivation, which will translate into test scores? Right now, you can't do that because people are stuck in their mindset. But with big data, with AI, you do have a platform, you do have an opportunity to create mechanisms and data that reveal that actually, if you give kids more space to ask questions, if you spend less time in school, if you focus more on the emotional learning aspects, if you do more student engagement, if you let students ask questions, if you build their curiosity, this will translate into better higher student motivation, which will translate automatically to long-term test performance. So let me give you an example to illustrate this. 150 years ago, hand washing was not prevalent in hospitals. In fact, it was considered a waste of time. It took decades. It took lots of courageous physician scientists like Ignaz Schimmelwitz in Vienna, like Joseph Lister in Britain, working against a system in order to promote the idea that hand washing should be mandatory in hospitals, which translated into the saving of millions of lives. So the question for me is, are we in that period in education today where we teachers, we parents just take a lot of things for granted? We just assume a lot of things that just aren't true. And is it possible for AI to reveal these invisible forces, these hidden patterns in the classroom, which will allow for more positive change? I do. I think that AI, if used properly, will promote more student autonomy, more emotional learning, more personalized learning.
Right. Yeah, I guess it's kind of, I'm probably summarizing poorly, but it's kind of like you're asking people that maybe if we did less of one thing, that might help. So to say less test prep, less drilling, that might be the way forward, but without data or AI to help us.
Our brain is a muscle. It's no different from going to the gym, right? I mean, if you go to the gym 8 hours a day, you're going to kill yourself. You're going to burn out. And that's what's happening to Chinese students now, where from kindergarten onwards, they're doing test prep, they're going to cram school, and by the time they hit university, they're finished. And that's horrible, because right now we know that in the age of AI, what's really important is to train our students to be lifelong learners. And the opposite is happening right now in China and in many education contexts.
Right. I might, because I'm looking at the time, I might ask our sort of final run-through question, which is just basically, in 20 years' time, what's an education system that you'd like to see to kind of take us from the the dark direction we're almost heading? Richard, do you want to lead us off with that?
Yeah, I was thinking a lot about this. So I thought in 20 years' time, I don't envision a classroom as such. I envision a community of learners working together on maybe some kind of project. And this community will not just be from the one school. This is just entirely a personal opinion, not even based on research or whatever, but the thought resonated with me. And the school, the classroom will transcend borders like never before. It won't just be the offices of Apple and Google, or the true international schools, such as what Michael was saying earlier, that he's got students in so many different parts of the world because of the nature of the community of the school. But a lot of us don't have those kind of schools. Everybody lives here. So being able to work on those kind of projects and those kind of classrooms where in real time we're able to transcend those boundaries. And 20 years is a long time in terms of how much technology can develop over time. So people can change as well. It won't be the same classmates that you have for the entire year. So every project that you take, depending on the personalization that takes place, you might be able to sort of pitch yourself against different students, or working with different students from a variety of different cultures, and the experience will be great. And for us to go into this direction, into the field of AI, VR, and all of these other tech-based acronyms that you can throw at us, firstly, in order to better explain something to someone and to ensure that the teaching and learning process is effective, you need a practitioner, you need a teacher, and that teacher needs to have that experience. A chemistry teacher, for example, can't teach chemistry if he or she has not conducted the experiment before. So teachers, no matter what the technology is, they need to be well versed. They need to be comfortable. The amount of teachers that have gone 180 degrees into this online learning and suddenly felt that they needed to be more outrageous than ever before, and more candid and more animated on camera, that in itself has had a lot of changes on teachers and their attitudes and their comfort level, if you like. So teachers need to be well versed. They need to be comfortable. And unless we've actually traveled the journey ourselves, we can't take people with us on this journey. So our professional development, how much is that transcending borders? How much is that being able to make us feel comfortable with people from other cultures, because we use all these learner profiles and personal goals, and half of the time it's hard for us to exhibit this ourselves. So while one may argue, do they need someone? You know, is there really going to be a teacher in the room? I would stand up and say, yes, while technology is exciting, I think a lot of us agree that we're all human beings. And only human beings will be able to fully understand, relate to the opportunities, relate to the complications, relate to the challenges at the human level. What teenagers are going through now and the anxieties that they're going through now are very different from what they went through 20 years ago. And unless we are in there experiencing that ourselves, how are we able to sort of guide them when we're exposing them to all of these new technologies? So when dealing with children, when dealing with technology, when dealing with the possible psychological implications of the use of technology, there needs to be someone who maybe in 20 years does not have to understand the entire content, but someone with the maturity, the wisdom, and the care and affection who understands how to navigate this new journey so that we can get the best out of it and we can get to smell the rose, but having to prevent students from hurting themselves dramatically with the thorns. So the teacher is a human quotient, if you like, and that to me, at least until I'm still alive, I actually don't see that changing.
Cool. All right. I have to throw to Francis because we had quite a long conversation of sort of taking tech outside and artificial reality to kind of look at flowers and nature, but it looks like he has just disappeared. So that's very well timed by me. Michael, do you want to talk to us about in 20 years' time, what would you like to see? It seems like the classroom might be up for destruction, but maybe we need a teacher around. What would you sort of say?
Yes, so it's what I'd like, not what I think will happen.
Yes, please. Yeah.
Okay, good. With H.G. Wells, Eagle, and Morlock, possibly with education. So yeah, I think to kind of discuss what Richard was discussing, I think the ability of tools to break down barriers. So I was in conversation with a Welsh teacher a week ago, Lenny Watkins, and he teaches at a poorer school in Wales, and he started a Skype club. And basically, one of the first things that he did was he basically did this virtual field trip to Sri Lanka. And those particular students got to see an elephant for the first time. Like, there's not many elephants in Wales in the valleys, because a lot of these students probably are never going to leave that particular geography. And this was an amazing opportunity for these students to experience something they would never have ever imagined unless there was a technology to do it. So I see the ability of technology to connect people, which is why it's the like part, because nationalism's on the rise, it seems, globally. And it's the ability to see the humanity in all of us, and the idea of authentic lessons as well. So the ability to problem solve with a school in Africa. So I'm doing it at the moment, not at the moment because of the COVID virus, but been connecting with the root and shoot schools in Tanzania and connecting my students and trying to solve problems for us in Malaysia with plastic pollution, and for them in Tanzania with water pollution. And the students are working together to collaborate to deal with real world problems. And this, I think, is where the future of education should lie. The ability to make these connections and put humanity at the heart of our education system, with technology being the tool that allows us to do that.
Beautifully said. Francis, I'll try see if you stay with us for this one. 20 years from now, what would you like to see in an education or a school system looking like?
Yeah, Michael and Richard pretty much shares much about how I would imagine school or learning in 20 years' time. I like what Michael has pointed out. I think, of course, technology will always continue to to get more advanced, right? It's not stopping. It's really you really see it accelerating in such exponential rate. But one thing that we should not forget, I think, part of the learning process, part of the job of being educators right now is to continue pushing
reminding the learners about the importance of humanity. I think that is what is very, very important. So regardless of the technology that would come out, I think we will always look for that teacher, for that educator who would communicate, who would shape future future members of society about the importance of putting humanity at the middle of the learning process. But I would say that in the end, in 20 years time, I would say that learning will always be with the learner. Wherever the learner is, we hope that learning happens. So that whether we have VR, AR, virtually going to another place, or maybe there's no more classroom in the end. Like the classroom, it will become a very sacred space for community building. But in the end, students can learn at home, like what's happening right now. I think what we can really recognize right now is, we've really anchored learning in the four walls of the classroom. We've limited learning in many countries, such that when the pandemic hit, we were scrambling. We were trying to catch up with the idea that learning could happen even if there is no face-to-face interaction. Of course, we value face-to-face interaction, but I think what the pandemic is telling us right now, maybe one thing that I've realized is, learning can happen whether it's face-to-face or not. But there are premium aspect of facing each other, learning from each other. I think those are the things that we need to value. I'm going back to what Michael has said again. I think it's the skills of empathy, global connections, like what Richard has mentioned. Those I think will be the top priorities of education now and even so in the future. A lot of things are happening right now. Black Lives Matter movement, the Corona pandemic, inequality in so many aspects. I don't think that technology can solve those problems, right? Perfectly. Technology will just be tools to help us solve those problems, but we need to keep in touch with our humanity so that we will be able to see what's happening around the world, and then maybe work together using AI, using whatever technology that we have to make the world a better place. Yeah, that's my idea for now.
Beautifully said. I love how you ended. So that's just my idea for now. Like it's a small thing. So we'll go to our last speaker, of course, Yang. In 2 minutes or less, 20 years from now. So obviously, China's set a goal for 2030 being the leaders in AI in education. By 2040, what would you like to see where you're at in 2 minutes or less?
Well, I think that's agreement. The future of schooling, you have to put humanity first. We have to stop seeing students as economic outputs and start developing fully as human beings. Unfortunately, it's not just our schools that have problems, our entire society is broken. We live in a mass industrial society, and our lives are centered around money, competition, and status. When we as human beings, we strive to learn, to create, and to love. And I see the future as not schools, not as companies, but as creative learning communities where people of all age groups, whether they're 5, 50, or 100, they're all working together to build a community, and they're all collaborating. Students are not longer students. They can be teachers as well. They're working on their own learning projects. And when they're not learning on their working projects, they're working as apprentices to adults who are working on their projects. So I see the future as rediscovering our humanity and coming together as human beings in order to solve the most pressing issues of today.
Oh, beautiful. And in under 2 minutes. Lovely. Basically, I'm going to throw to Preeti in a moment, but just to say, all of us are on social media, Twitter, wherever you want to find us, LinkedIn, all of those things, even on the platform that you're actually watching this now. You can even make a meeting. I've got a meeting booked straight after this with someone. So feel free to reach out in any of those forms. And Preeti, if you're here, feel free to jump in and close us out.
Thank you so much, to all the panelists for such an insightful discussion. I'm sure the attendees have really benefited from all the points that you've shared. I'm sure I have definitely learned a lot today. The next session is going to begin soon. So, all those who have signed up here, hop on to Swapcard. The next session is lined up just after this. In between, if you do have time, go and view, some of the other sessions that we're running today, network with speakers, peers, write what Stephen mentioned right now. And don't forget to visit the virtual booths, which is under the sponsor tab. So see you guys again soon. And thank you so much again, panelists.